Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sonic Lab's special presentation. This is a kind of remote, or it might be a Friday fun. We're not quite sure how this is going to work out because we haven't been able to design this one totally. But what I do know is I've got Glen from Ash and Sound Machines, who we've spoken to many times in the past, there in his evil laboratory. We're trying something a little different here because I do a series called Friday Fun, which is a synth jam where I explore sort of pieces of equipment together. And we thought we might try this with some of the, because you were suggesting that there's some interesting FM capabilities and other things that I could try with the Hydrasynth. So this is a sort of two-parter. So we're going to talk about what things I could try. Then I'm going to go and try them in my own time. And then this whole video will come together as one beautiful, cohesive thing in the end. So Glenn, what are the things that, because I know you're really deep into synthesis and you designed a lot of this stuff. So what have you been finding? What areas should I try and explore that perhaps wouldn't have been immediately obvious to me?
Well, for me, one interesting thing, I've always loved FM synthesis since the early days when it first came out. I remember taking a class at UCLA. One of the sound designers for the FM, for the DX7, Clark Spangler, was teaching a class. And so I went and took a class with him back in 1984 or something. FM's always been kind of one of those interesting things to me, and I've always enjoyed it. So having FM in the Hydra, I've actually designed a lot of my patches using FM in here. One thing about FM synthesis that everybody thinks of with the DX7 is kind of these pre-made algorithms, and you go from this structure to this structure to this structure, and a lot of companies have kind of followed that because they were the originator of it. But if you looked at other systems that did FM, also known as phase modulation synthesis, things like the very rare GDS that Wendy Carlos used, you could create your own algorithms on it, and the Hydra sort of allows that. You can create your own algorithms within the given structure and routing that the Hydra allows. So it's not just like a 2-operator or a 3-operator or 4-operator FM synth. You can't really think of it in those terms. You do have 2 main oscillators, but each of the mutators then can also generate their own sine or triangle waves. And so you really end up with 6 operators plus a 7th just with your oscillator 3. So the number of routings gets kind of crazy. I believe I sent you over a graphic, and it was just a graphic that I put together just to kind of wrap my head around the different kind of routings. And
well, I actually have it prepared, and it's quite impenetrable to me because I didn't write it, and I haven't had a chance to try these things out. But what I'm hoping that I could do is figure out some things to try. So if you give me a couple of ideas to try, then I can maybe explore that in the other part of this video, where I can kind of maybe explain how I've come to where I've got to and incorporate some of those ideas. So what should I try first?
Well, a good starting point with any FM is just initialize a patch and choose sine waves. FM gets very complex sounds very quickly. So if you start with a sine wave, you're kind of going to start with the best building blocks for using FM. So I would do that. And in, say, Mutator 1, Mutator 2, I would also choose the sine waves within those. So now you've basically got 3 operators. You've got the oscillator, which is the main carrier, goes into a mutator, and Mutator 1 is now modulating that.
Right.
That modulated sum now gets into Mutator 2, and then it modulates the sum of the output of Mutator 1. So it's 3 operators, but it's really, you got 2 here, and then they kind of become one bunch, and then this other one modulates that other bunch. One aspect of FM synthesis, though, a lot of guys coming out of analog or something, they take a filter knob and they turn it all the way up or they turn it all the way down. You hear a lot of stuff like too harsh. It's like, well, there's more than just on or off. for these things.
I thought it was just 0 or 11, Glenn. I'm very surprised to hear you say that, right?
But FM synthesis especially is in the fine details. So by using very small amounts of modulation in them, that's where you start to get into the sweet spot of what FM is.
Right. Okay. Well, with that in mind, I will go away and try and do some things. There may be some more behind the scenes communications. I'll feel a bit like a student having my work marked when I bring it back to you and say, well, what do you think, Glenn? And you'll say, that sucked, or yeah, that's a good sound, or how did you do? So what I'm hoping for is you'll go, wow, that sounds amazing.
Well, there are no wrong sounds, are there?
That's exactly what I want to hear. That's exactly
that's my jazz saxophone background coming out.
The right answer. Glenn, thank you so much for trying this concept out, and hopefully it will yield some interesting results to our listeners. I hope you have or had a great Christmas, because this video will come out afterwards all that, and have a great new year, and we'll speak to you again soon. So before we get started, I'll just try and introduce the concept of FM linear and the mutators in the Hydrasynth. So as Glenn suggested, we're going to just basically take a sine wave as from oscillator 1, just to introduce the concept, because it keeps it nice and simple. So here's my raw sine tone. I go into mutator 1. We're in FM linear mode. Mutators are these things which essentially modify the oscillators. They're kind of quite unique to the Hydrasynth. We're using FM linear mode, and we're going to have the input of a sine wave, which is what we were instructed to do by Glenn as a starting point. There are lots of different options here, but we'll try and keep it simple. So now I'm just going to start introducing. That sounds very FM-like to those of you who know what that sounds like. So now if we change the ratio, let's go to half. It's almost like a filter, isn't it, the way it introduces. If we go down to a quarter and play really low, you can hear that that's a quarter of my pitch that's being modulated by. So taking it up means that we get more sort of musical examples. Adding feedback really changes the character, so it's can be quite subtle. Now mutator 2 will now work on both of these together. So if we take that up into somewhere kind of quite high, again we've got a dry wet mix, so we can add quite subtle amounts, and then of course we can modulate these parameters in the sound. So that's the basic concept of this FM that we're talking about. And of course, we've got two distinct paths. So we've got oscillator 1 with 2 mutators, oscillator 2 with 2 mutators, and of course, the modulators can sort of cross-pollinate from between those two paths. So we've got quite a complex set of routing possibilities there. Glenn actually sent me a bunch of presets which are kind of starting points for FM. They've got a load of macros in there. And so, for instance, if I just take this classic FM piano. So that gives us that sort of really quite classic and authentic FM sound. So it can do all of that stuff, but maybe there are some other FM areas that we can explore as well. So let's take a look at some of that. So if I come to my D bank, which I'm afraid I haven't named at all. I will, however, be putting these up on Patreon once I've renamed them, so you can download them and try them in your Hydrasynth, should you have one. I think what I was number 24 was the last one I was working on. Yeah, there we go. So if I now play this. patch, there's kind of reverb, there's cascading stuff, but there is FM at the heart of it. So if I just take the reverb off a little bit, well, off fully, and then just show you what was going on there. If I open the filter up. So what I've got here is, that should be at 0. There's no levels on the first two oscillators. There is on oscillator 3, because oscillator 3 kind of provides the underlying tone. But I've got these additional envelopes which are looping, which are bringing in the other things. So if I go to my mod matrix, envelope 3 is routed to the oscillator 1 volume, so it's triggering. So that is essentially this, and is looping at quarters. Envelope 4 is dealing with the dry and wet of mutant 1. So mutant 1 is FM at 5 ratio, or 0.5 ratio. And then envelope 5 is oscillator 2 volume. So now if I change some of this mutant, actually if I use shift, top tip, use shift and turn, you get to whole numbers. So from 5. I can change the tone of those quite dramatically. And then I've also got oscillator 2, which I'm not using those yet. Stuff with the tonality. So now when I bring the reverb back in, let's go back to my original patch, bring those additional mutators in, make them quite high, so we've got that tinkle. And then on top of that, I'm using this in theremin mode. Tempo synced LFO, so we get quite a lot of rhythm going on. Nonsense, but you know how I feel about those things. Let's try a couple of other patches as well. Okay, this one I've added a bit of external modulation from the LFO out of this neutron here, which is coming in, and this is the sound I've got. This is just a single oscillator with 2 mutators. So if we go to with FM, as Glenn said, will make a huge difference. So if I hit shift here, I'm just going to take that up. So it's modulating half. And what that's modulating is the ratio of mutator 1, just by a tiny amount. So it's effectively like me doing something like that, only a bit more controlled. Here's a patch which uses that sort of more percussive aspect. I'm using the velocity to affect the depth of the wet dry mix of this, and using a very fast envelope. So if we change, you can hear the characteristic of that pluck sound is handled by the sort of ratio of that mutator. Go up some. And I've got a looping envelope to... That's more your traditional pluck sound. This patch is creating two paths. So what I've got here is oscillator 1 is doing the FM stuff. Oscillator 2 is doing a wave scan, is tuned up. So if I now go, this is another nifty thing that we can go into solo mode. We can just listen to oscillator 1. And you can hear it's got this real, even though it's just a sine wave, what I've got in the mod matrix is I'm modulating the ratio of this by a tiny amount. And it adds that sort of high sort of airy, almost sort of PCM style harmonic on the top. So if I now come out of solo mode, and then oscillator 2 is going to oscillator 2. Solo mode is more of a wave scan. But combined with the FM oscillator, just adds a real nice extra sort of unusual texture. So this guy, I'm trying to create a kind of like a lately bass type of thing. And again, I've got everything set to 0, and then I'm using the mod matrix to trigger the envelope depth. So I've got these little different variants in envelope, which is just affecting the level of each oscillator and mutant. So it's close, and you can kind of treat it almost like creating an element, you know. So one of the elements is this sort of front end. Another element is what's sort of underlying it, the tone underlying it. And it goes back to what Glen was saying, which is sort of treating it like little building blocks. It's quite interesting. There are limitations because of the way that these are structured. We can't have lots of different shaped algorithms. We're sort of fairly limited. So mutator 1 will modulate oscillator 1, and then mutator 2 will oscillate both of them. But we've got the different inputs that we can have as sources here. So we can have ring mod, or, you know, so we can change the flavour of the output. Quite interesting. So we can quite radical changes just by changing up the input the sources to those mutators. Anyway, I'm going to play out with some more of that first patch because I just love the way that sounded. So let's just go back to the fantastically named D24 and play a little bit more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.